Hello, my name is Park Han-chol and I'm a teacher at Deok-sung Girls High School. The topic of my presentation is Principles of Communication on the Social Media Platforms. We refer to social network services, or SNS, as platforms that help strengthen existing human relationships online or build new ones and manage information. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram are well-known social media platforms. People easily connect with other people who have similar interests through SNS, share their daily experiences and information, communicate their thoughts, and form social relationships. So people show their lives on social media and express their thoughts to maintain better relationships. The problem is that while these expressions or disclosures can help expand relationships, it can sometimes worsen them. Expressions of prejudice or stereotypes and actions that secretly ignore or alienate others can make other people suffer without their knowledge. Moreover, excessive self-exaggeration or gossip can increase fatigue and depression caused by SNS, which can increase resistance to SNS itself. Therefore, if you want to build a social relationship through SNS and expand it, you need the wisdom to distinguish between do's and don'ts. The rules of communication in the process of socializing through media may vary depending on the customs or implicit rules of the online community to which the members belong. The SNS space should not only be recognized as a space for individual expression, but also be used in compliance with customs and rules that are followed by all the members of the community. Therefore, it is not just a passive attitude that follows a given principle, but an active one that makes the rules of communication and puts them into practice to fit the situation and the members involved. We had an activity to make promises that we should keep when communicating with students via social media. I'm currently using Google Classroom. After exchanging opinions online in the clubroom, we gathered offline to decide what to include and what to exclude from our promises. As you can see, there are many things on the blackboard. So if you look at the blackboard, there are contents that are written and then erased, right? Those are the contents that have not been agreed upon. About 10 and above are the contents of the promises that the students agreed to keep. If you look at the first one, it means decide when to include and when to exclude. It wouldn't be good to interfere too much in the process of communication, right? The first principle is that you have to make an appropriate decision according to the circumstances. The second is, don't be stingy with clicking like and commenting. We click like and add comments when reacting and responding on SNS. The third one is, don't leave messages and pictures that disparage your friends. It's a rule that we do not engage in actions that belittle others. Next, constructive criticism is okay, but shameful one is not. Students make a promise saying we shouldn't just compliment others, but we should also use constructive criticism. However, we should avoid the part where we just undermine each other. We should only say what we can be responsible for. There are many cases when we talk about things that are false or exaggerated. So we made a promise that we should only talk about things that we can be held responsible for. Also, don't reply too late. Students have to interact in the process of communicating with each other, so we should ban late replies. Also, be polite when communicating with others. I think it's a fundamental principle that we must follow when communicating. No matter how close your friends are, when writing to each other, you should always be polite. Also, don't be the only one chatting. Give others a chance to reply too. You need to match the tempo and chat when interacting on platforms such as WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger. Don't write too fast. Give the other person a chance to reply. When the age group is a little different, there are many cases where the other person often fails to keep pace. One of the promises is about just that. Don't bully or ignore your friends. It's a representative example of cyberbullying. That's why we promise to show respect to each other without alienating or ignoring our friends. Don't tell stories about people you can't see face to face on social media. It means we won't say bad things about others just because we don't see them. Also, distinguish between attention and interruption, as I mentioned earlier. It's not easy for us to distinguish this, but we have to use social media after distinguishing between the things that worry us most and those that cause interruption and interference. Next, upload words, images, and videos that suit the characteristics of each platform. Whereas Instagram is a photo-based SNS, on Facebook you have both pictures and text. Therefore, it's better to post words, images, and videos according to the situation. There was an option that said don't be too confident in yourself. But for being overconfident, we haven't agreed upon any standard yet. Try to be close, not casual. The students were thinking, why can't I just be casual? SNS friends had a lot of concerns about being just casual and being close, which was not agreed upon, so we promised to erase it and keep the above things together. We conducted an offline campaign by writing the content agreed upon onto badges and attaching them to our bags. We also carried out a campaign to share the rules we made together with our friends through our personal SNS. The second activity was an interview about the use of social network services and then writing a prescription for the student. Just as issuing a prescription, it diagnoses your friend's current situation and provides medicine. The interview is about a friend who is depressed and has SNS fatigue syndrome. Write down the name of the diagnosis, prescription medicine, time of administration, and prescription reason in the prescription. For prescription medicine, see the examples, but you are free to fill them out. If you look at the samples students have written, you can see that they are suggesting ways to enhance self-esteem to a friend who is depressed and has SNS fatigue syndrome. They're offering a measure to make sure that they're happy with a good relationship while not comparing their bad situation with anyone else's. Lastly, this is my assignment for you. Read the interview with a student who has a clear understanding of freedom of expression and write a prescription for this student. We look forward to active participation. It is natural to express and reveal yourself in the process of social relationships with the SNS, but excessive self-exaggeration, self-expression with prejudice and stereotype, alienation and ignorance, as well as creation of gossip and rumors can worsen the relationship. For a smooth social relationship, it is important to follow the conventions and implicit rules of the online community to which the members belong. Of course, it is important to follow the principles that others have made, but I think it will be more effective if they make their own and practice the rules of communication that suit their situation.